The Growth Happens Dawn to Dusk podcast with Matt Devitt. He talks with people about their journey, where they succeeded and failed, to help others on their quest. We're all on a journey that starts and ends every day. This is when we grow, between dawn and dusk. And now, your host, Matt Devitt.
Welcome, everybody, to the Growth Happens Dawn to Dusk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Devitt, bringing to you another interesting guest who is going to highlight a few interesting things. His name is Kevin Dunnell, and we're going to end up talking about how to keep a network alive, how to keep that creative side that you may have had all through your life, how to keep that relevant, and a way to kind of refocus that into some of your technical background that you may have. So very interesting conversation I had with Kevin. Really glad I got an opportunity to sit next to him on a flight. He was a fantastic neighbor to have at 50,000 feet. So before we get into that, definitely appreciate all of the likes and shares that have been going on with this podcast. Please leave a review, 5-star, definitely helps over on iTunes. You can also find me on Stitcher, Spotify, as well as within Pippa. So definitely leave some of those comments and shares. All of it is really appreciated. And with that being said, without further ado, Kevin Dunnell. So Kevin, thanks a lot for coming on to the podcast. Really appreciate you coming on to the Growth Happens Dawn to Dusk podcast and, just kind of telling everybody about your interesting journey. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. It's great to be here.
So just for the audience's knowledge, it's a kind of interesting the way Kevin and I met up. So I think I've made this reference before, and anybody who's seen the movie Fight Club will get it. But we were basically single-serving friends on a flight, and I can't remember if we were delayed on takeoff or something, but we just started chatting up engineering topics, things like that. And lo and behold, we've stayed in touch. So I guess we became more than just kind of that single-serving friend that you pick up on the airport ride. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you about a lot of the stuff you were doing. And, one of the things I think that would be interesting, Kevin, that you could probably illuminate is, so when you and I were talking, it was all, we were talking blockchain, we were talking like 3D printing. But then you also referenced way back in the day when you first started getting into, in quotes, industry, whatever that means to certain people. You were kind of aerospace, you were working with cars. You were with Fiat Chrysler, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
So so what's the fast forward there? I mean, to me, they seem just like they don't connect.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I'm kind of amazed at sort of just looking at the trajectory I've taken. I would never have guessed that this is sort of the path that I took. But, I mean, way back in the day, when I was younger, I was just fascinated with rockets. I used to build model rockets all the time. Fast forward to university, I ended up going to the University of Michigan with a focus on aerospace engineering. I did minor in art and design because that was always something that I could feel myself getting lost in. It's the type of thing that I was doing where time would pass and I wouldn't even realize it. Graduate from school, and I ended up taking a job in Detroit, working for right outside of Detroit, Auburn Hills, working for Fiat Chrysler. I was doing aerothermal engineering for these guys. Wind tunnel testing, just beating the hell out of these cars, getting them really hot, taking temperature readings all over the cars. We'd have thermocouples, 200 plus all over these things, and doing fluid dynamics and sort of this trade-off between how much can you cool the car down, but not giving it too much drag and still meeting those fuel efficiency requirements. I did a stint while I was at Chrysler. I had an opportunity to jump over from that group to an innovation team. And while I was in that team, we were looking at really broad concepts, sort of what does transportation look like 20 years down the road? We were sort of just scratching the surface at that time on concepts like the sharing economy, autonomous driving, just things that weren't very mainstream at the time. And we'd have two different approaches. One where, we're looking at what engineers are doing within the company now, and, how do we make smaller increments on that to get us in the direction of this high level thinking. But then we'd also look at what are completely other companies doing? What is NASA doing? What is some of the top bicycle manufacturers doing? And how do we sort of compare what mobility means in these senses of the word with sort of emerging technology, things like flexible displays or additive manufacturing? How do we sort of combine that together and then relate that back to our industry, and what can we do to sort of guide us in that direction? So it's just a really cool, eye-opening experience. And, that's where I was really introduced to this concept of design thinking and just rapid prototyping. And it did draw a lot upon my engineering skills, but then also a lot of the art and design work I did back in university and sort of in my free time. So it was a blast. And it also ended up affording me an opportunity to make a connection in the Bay Area, in Palo Alto, with a tech company. And that's sort of how I bridged over to this tech space. This company was a large IT services company we were about 200,000 people around the world, so enormous company. And the leadership team there was trying to restructure this really large organization with a focus on design thinking and artificial intelligence. And we were doing a lot of the same stuff. There are a lot of parallels between sort of this design thinking work within the automotive industry and the IT space. So that was sort of the common thread that allowed me to make that leap. And then while I was working there, that's sort of what led to all of this work that I had been talking to you about on this flight. Sort of, how do you create something with emerging technology to allow people to better understand emerging technology, allow them to put their hands on things that you can't that are very at a high concept level, hard for people to grasp. So for example, something like artificial intelligence or blockchain. Blockchain is thrown around constantly within the last 2 years. It's been getting a lot of press, and not so much the correct press, I would say. And a lot of times coming from people that aren't necessarily the people that should be explaining it. I think a lot of people get kind of scared by emerging technology because of their lack of knowledge around it, or sort of stories that are told around it that tend to get hyped up in a negative light. You can see this with artificial intelligence quite a bit. And so really what our group was trying to do was, make this stuff more human, make it so where people can come up and put their hands on it. They can see a real world example where, while, a lot of people are talking about the singularity and how robots are going to come in and take over people's jobs, this is actually where we're at today with artificial intelligence, more so machine learning as opposed to artificial intelligence. And sort of educating people along those lines, but then also showing them incrementally where this can go, and then sort of what that looks like in a larger sort of social setting. So I spent about 3 years doing that in San Francisco, and I left about a year ago to start my own company, which I'm doing something very similar now. We are a rapid prototype design consulting studio. And we do basically what I was describing prior. We make ideas extant in the real world, and we make concepts that are tangible. We're a globally distributed team. We're all tinkerers, hackers, creatives, and engineers. And we work with people from startups to Fortune 500 companies. When we're working with startups, we help them create a minimum viable product, MVP, as quick as possible. And so this is useful for them for talking with investors, securing funding at an early stage. But it's also really helpful for larger businesses because we tend to work with their marketing teams. And a lot of the times they have these sort of broader visions and a lot of buzzwords. It seems like you're kind of playing buzzword bingo with a lot of these larger marketing companies. And what we tend to do is bring it down to, again, a more human level where people can actually touch things and have a better understanding of what we're actually talking about. So that's where I'm at today.
That is quite a whirlwind trip. One of the the items that you brought up in there that I found pretty interesting was, and I don't want to say you glossed over it, but you, with the Fiat company, you basically said something along the lines of, yeah, and then I started to, get to know this tech company out in Palo Alto. So basically a company that's not even geographically in your current backyard when you were in the
Right.
greater Detroit area. So how did you, what were some of the threads you saw in potentially either the networking that allowed you to make that connection, and is that something that you've seen like beneficial or you've repeated in order to kind of grow these other ventures, because now you're leading a group of, like you said, global tinkerers that by nature are not in your backyard. So how did you kind of build up and create that network, or even get into the networking with people that allowed you to make that jump?
Yeah, I apologize. I definitely did gloss over that.
No, 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 no. I thought it was great. I was just kind of like, hey, I think there's something really interesting here. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, when I go back and tell this story, it's just, I start getting reminded of all these different things I did, and it's all kind of rushing back. So, yeah, I truly attribute this all to my network. It was a mutual friend that I had that, with the leadership team down in Palo Alto for this company, that I had stayed in touch with, that actually introduced me to this team, made a recommendation, or made a comment actually in passing about sort of the work that I was doing, my background. It just so happened a project that this company was working on, this technology company, was aerospace related. And there was a lot of overlap in sort of the way they wanted to approach that problem and sort of my background. We got to talking. And yeah, it sort of grew organically from there. But you're right. I mean, where I'm at today, even sort of beyond making that leap from automotive over to technology, it's totally my network that is to attribute that to. Being able to sort of continue this lifestyle and be able to have my own company, I wouldn't be here without the network that I've created. So, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with sort of the things I've picked out in sort of, the successful, I don't want to say successful, but sort of the way that I've found good days from bad days. I mean, I make an effort to constantly keep in touch with friends, but then also past colleagues. I mean, my story, your story, we're just one of millions and billions of people, where if you're constantly aware of these different threads and these different lives, and there's so much more overlap than you'd think there would be. Even people from high school or people from college, people that I've had a class with, did a project with at Chrysler. It's crazy to see how, sometimes we're all on these sort of convoluted paths that somehow continually to cross over. How I'm talking with you now about this project after catching you on a flight. Actually, where you had showed me it just came back to me. We started talking based off of the time lapse hack, when you're landing in a plane, coming down, and I was taking a video, and you had showed me to go ahead and try out a time lapse for that.
Yeah, just so when you're breaking through the clouds, it speeds it up a little bit, and just playing with something. Playing with that creative itch. So it sounds like community in and of itself is a very integral part, not only to just the way you view your professional life, but really just the way you view how you want to move forward within, life in general. Like having a community, those around you, is really important. What are some of the ways that you continue to, foster and grow? But then I also think there's an interesting, maybe opposite side of this, but also to prune the community, right? So we can start with the first one. Like, how do you focus on, kind of growing or maintaining just that level of community that you currently have?
I think I'm just very open to interactions, for one.
I'll attest to that. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, if it's as simple as, sitting next to somebody on a flight, starting up a conversation. I actually give you credit for that this time. But a lot of the work that I do, like I had mentioned, for larger companies, it tends to be for marketing teams. And a lot of those events that we support are either trade shows or sort of large announcements, places where there's lots of people. So thankfully, there are a lot of opportunities for me to sort of capitalize on that, given the nature of my work. But sort of in my own space, I make it a point to, I hate to say this, but I actually go on LinkedIn quite a bit. I don't use Facebook. I really don't use social media. It's really LinkedIn, Instagram that I pay attention to. But I just kind of find it fascinating, given the sort of course that I've traversed, seeing how that sort of plays out in other people's professional careers. And I love to stay in touch with, when so-and-so gets a new job, or I don't tend to participate in, public, either posting or talking with people, but I love reaching out to them personally and sort of, chatting up about, that career move or how they make that, and sort of getting it back into their personal lives and things that we had shared previously. I definitely always make it a point to sort of, given all this travel and all this moving around, going to different events and having a team that's distributed pretty globally, and also working for an international company and developing relationships around the world. As I travel around, I always make it a point to, see the people in these locations that I'm going to visit, whether it's just to grab a beer or, get dinner, go out and actually do something. But I always make it a point to see people when I'm in these physical locations, because I really think that's at a premium today, seeing somebody face to face, given LinkedIn, given our connectivity all the time, us being able to have this interview over the phone right now. I think people also do, on the opposite side of that, sort of place a premium on getting that sort of attention or that sort of interaction. And I guess sort of voicing this, it kind of sounds almost like, this is my, it almost sounds a bit manipulative, but I don't see it. It doesn't feel that way to me. I think I genuinely enjoy sort of interacting with friends, interacting with people that I meet, and sort of, being part of different people's lives, and likewise keeping up with different people's lives around the world.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that sounds manipulative. I mean, with myself traveling a lot, I mean, it's not uncommon if I can, connect with a, college friend or something like that when I happen to be in the neighborhood. I mean, it's always one of those, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Can we get together? It's really up to that
Yeah.
person. Does it fit their schedule? Does it
Sure.
not? Cool, no big deal. I mean, I know for myself, like the ones that I really enjoy having within like my own personal community don't worry so much about the time, in between contact, but more the quality that happens during each contact. And so
Definitely.
I've never really thought of it. I mean, I can understand where it could feel, from that manipulative standpoint potentially, but I always looked at it from more of a free will standpoint of like, hey, if it works for everybody, great, let's go have a good time. And then, just pick right up where we left off. Those are the friendships and within the community I really put a premium on, because then there's no guilt where I feel like, oh, I've got to check in with this person, in 6 months,
Totally.
or they might feel bad. It's like, I mean, there's a friend of mine who I hadn't seen since I graduated college, and got together, and you catch up on some of the old stuff, but you really just pick up where you left off, and it was amazing. He's still one of my best friends.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. Those are definitely the ones to hold on to. And I mean, to your point about sort of the pruning, I think that's your go-to right there, right? I mean, people that do sort of make you feel guilty, or relationships that it does feel more like a task to reach out to somebody, or more of like an agenda item. I don't think it's as unfortunately as valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I
But
mean,
that is
there's how many people out in the world. It's like, okay, so I have a choice too on who I interact with. So why would I
right.
go where there's negative energy when I can go where there's positive energy?
Totally. But to that
So
point, I mean, that is definitely one of the hard parts, is, sort of realizing how much time that you're, while I like seeing everybody and, giving my time to other people and putting it other places, that is definitely something I struggle with, I think, is sort of pruning those connections, or it's something I'm working on, at least. So totally understand where that comes from.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes, I'm kind of thinking about this out loud as I work it through in my head, but maybe pruning isn't the right way, but it's more of we stay with the kind of gardening idea of maybe it's seasons, right? Certain connections
Right.
fall out of season, well, the next season comes in, so the next harvest or whatever's there, as that goes out of season, like that same person that fell out now comes back into season again based on where different people are within their life. But yeah, it's pretty interesting on how if you try to make it look more organic in its nature and less of a kind of a mechanical I guess process.
Right.
One of the things that
Yeah,
I
definitely.
found interesting when we talked as well, and even talking now to you, is you're quite the traveler, just in general. And I got that feeling when we spoke. I mean, I think when I was talking to you, you were telling me about where you had been that month, and it wasn't just in the U.S. I mean, I think there were a couple of countries in there.
Right.
Um, so one of the things, and I looked up your profile. So since you brought up LinkedIn, I did pull up your profile while we were talking real quick, and the remote year. I've never
Yeah.
heard of that before. What is that?
So it's a program for essentially geared towards digital nomads. I really don't like that term. I prefer saying creative cohort. But it was really cool. My friend who I had studied abroad with, we studied abroad in Australia our junior year of college. His sister was actually on the second sort of cohort that went out with Remote Year. And basically what Remote Year is it's a professional group that people apply to. Everybody has a job that allows them to work remotely. And so a lot of these people are, some people are, they're still working a 9-to-5 job that, they don't have to go to the office. They can do most of their work from home. Most of the people are freelancers. A large part of the group actually owns their own business. But basically Remote Year curates this group of people, and then sets an itinerary for an entire year and has this group move around from city to city throughout the entire year. So I just went on I think it was the 17th cohort to go out with Remote Year. And we started back in November of 2017. So I was meeting you just at the tail end of my experience with them. But we spent, I think we lived in 10 or so different countries over the entire year. Every month was a different city. And during that time, we'd be based in one of those cities, but then also take a couple trips, maybe to a country over, another country over. And some of these countries are easier to do that with. But it was an amazing experience. I mean, we were all working in co-working spaces daily, but then, over the weekends or after work, we were immersing ourselves in a culture that was completely different from what I had known prior. So really cool experience. And it's actually this whole concept of, working remotely or sort of traveling and this digital nomad lifestyle. There are a couple other groups out there in addition to Remote Year, and this is definitely something that's picking up in sort of my generation. And you can see a lot of stuff being geared toward this sort of style of life and work now, where you're sort of kind of always on, but then you kind of wrap your work lifestyle together a little bit more. I've kind of always worked better that way, personally. I have a hard time fully shutting off, I think, one or the other, which, I mean, it kind of goes back to this whole, friendships and, business partners and, I love going out for a beer, but then also, talking about a new startup project or, there's never been a fully on or off, for me between the two. So it made something like this very, very enticing to me, and very cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a very, very unique experience from the standpoint of, it probably hit a lot of different buttons for you. The travel,
Oh yeah,
the newness of knowing you're going to wake up somewhere different, and maybe 2 weeks to 4 weeks later, a small community. So at least you had your tribe, so to say, that you were traveling with, and
yeah,
going around. The remote working that you were actually doing at that standpoint, I find really interesting because the way some parts of the economy are going, um, really open this up for working remotely. Um, but then also you work within rapid prototyping, which the
right,
way I would think of that is that's going to be made in a physical location, potentially one location. So then you've got those individuals that really, there's certain individuals that won't be able to work remote. Um, and I'm not saying that's bad. It's kind of interesting when I look at it. Like you could have this whole, portion of a culture that, like you talk about, can be pretty much anywhere. And then this other
right.
portion that supports the economy and the culture, where they're just like, nope, this is where I go every day, 9 to 5. It's just kind of interesting the way that break is becoming more and more apparent these days.
Right. I mean, to that point, I actually think that break is even getting a little bit more muddied now too, because like you had mentioned, a lot of the prototyping I do, yes, there's a good portion of it that's screen based, but there is a lot of sort of tangible, either 3D printed objects, like physical circuitry that needs to be made in the world. There's a tangible component to a lot of the work that I do. Um, and it was just interesting to see. I was a little worried about this at first, but I did quite a bit of research before starting this program, and not only co-working spaces are becoming a big deal, and just for listeners that might not be familiar, they're basically just shared working spaces, high-speed internet access. You pay a small fee. Lots of them tend to have coffee and snacks available as well. Set up similarly to a lot of startup spaces, but something else that I've noticed that's pretty prominent now too are maker spaces. And so these are also places where you pay a very small fee and have access to really high powered equipment that is pretty expensive and otherwise pretty difficult to have access to. So things like really great 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC machines, welding equipment, like very powerful tools in some cases. And it's funny, I think the first place we were headed to was Vietnam, Hanoi, Vietnam. And I remember just doing a quick Google search and finding, I think, 3 or so maker spaces right around the area with all of these sort of things. And this whole concept was alive and well there. Next place we were going was Chiang Mai, Thailand. They had them as well. So I think this concept is pretty widespread now. And it also opens the door for a lot of just interesting sort of physical manufacturing opportunities when you're talking about countries that are sort of still growing, where there are a lot of people that are able to help out at a relatively affordable price as well. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah, I would agree. So with that level of interaction across, different cultures and, perspectives, your own cohort that you're working with, did you go into it with, a set perspective or something like that, and just of the world or workspace or whatever it might have been? And after a year, did you leave and have, that old perspective just completely changed? Did it get better? Like, just how did you feel you changed going into it versus coming out, like during that process?
That's a great question, and I'm honestly kind of surprised I haven't been confronted with that yet since getting off of this trip from anybody else. It was an interesting time when I started that experience. I had just left this larger tech company, just started my own business. I was getting things off the ground. So I think sort of just that transition from leaving the corporate world, where right up from going to college, graduating college, getting a 9-to-5 job, I was very set on this is what work life looks like. Going to the Valley and kind of getting a sense that I'm traveling quite a bit for work. I still have a 9-to-5 job, but all these people are sort of tinkering in their free time, and I was exposed to a lot of that. To leaving the corporate world, going on a trip like this, where you see people, living in Morocco who, a 9-to-5 job is so far from the norm there. And then you kind of look at this sort of making your own way and sort of starting a business of your own. It doesn't have to be this sort of set time or this sort of way of living. And it really just kind of, for better or for worse, gave me this sense that, anything is possible. Like, I can create whatever looking life I want to for myself. I mean, there are so many different ways that people are living their life around the world. And, we're taught at, a young age, especially, in suburban America growing up, and, what the American dream is, and this is how you achieve it. It's a very narrow view on how to live your life. And so I think if anything, it just, like I said, for better or for worse, it's almost too many options, because I mean, you can do anything. But it was a very empowering thing to realize.
So with the I guess the knowing of now there's a buffet of selections of which you will, which way you want to live your life or potentially move forward with it. So now that you have all of these options, how have you started to actually narrow that down and, implement what you think is best for, your companies that you're up and running now?
Yeah, it's been difficult. That initial realization is sort of drinking from a water fountain, because I sort of had all these options available, and I tried doing everything. I tried doing, 8 projects at once. And you simply can't do that. You gotta pick and choose, and to really make any substantial progress on anything, you really need to focus on a handful of things. And I've sort of found that, 2 to 3 projects is sort of my sweet spot right now. I've noticed that, doing one project at a time, I tend to get a little bit bored with that, and my mind will start to wander to all these other things and want to, touch and play with all these different other ideas. But having 2 or 3 sort of key projects that are enough diversified and ideally at different stages is sort of the sweet spot that I've come to realize.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that not only do you have variety across topics, but also, the timeline. So as you're, basically handing one project off, you got another one that's onboarding, one that's, basically somewhere in the middle of that process. Yeah, I would agree. Definitely. I think from project management jobs I've had in the past, you very quickly start to get an idea of either the number or like just general scope size when you kind of add them all together. You sum them all up, like, okay, this is about what I can handle. And once you figure that out, it's really just about, managing it and getting more efficient as far as the outcome. So, definitely. Well, Kevin, I definitely want to be respectful of your time. I just took a look at the clock, and I know you got to jump over to another call shortly. So I definitely appreciate you, taking the time talking about this. I definitely want to do a part 2 with you. I mean, we didn't even get a chance to really talk about, your businesses that are just up and running. I mean, they're pretty new. I think they're just over the, you got a couple of 1-year-old companies that you're working with right now. So I would definitely love to do a part 2 with you sometime in the future. If people are interested in learning more about you, what you're doing, maybe to connect with you about remote workspaces, what are some good ways that people can find you in the vast interwebs?
So yeah, in the interwebs, LinkedIn, like I had mentioned before, is always good for me. For a little bit more, something more personal, Instagram, my handle is Kevin Dunnell. I also have a website, also just kevindunnell.com. And yeah, you can check out our website. It's pretty plain right now, but we are working on a blog for it. It is bit.design. That is just the URL. So yeah, you can stay up to date with what we're doing as a company there as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you again for the time. I'll definitely, we'll have to get together. Maybe we'll do something in person if we actually connect in an airport again sometime in the future. And look forward to talking with you, and all the best on these new companies that you got up and running.
Thanks so much, Matt. Would love to do a part 2 as well, by the way. Looking forward to the future. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no
Really
worries. Take care, friend.
Thank you. Take care.
I hope everybody enjoyed that conversation with Kevin. I really enjoy his perspective on networking, on remote working, and how you can just pick up and go, creativity. Just great perspective. I really look forward to meeting up again with him in the future and doing a round 2 to see where he's going. Definitely check him out on the interwebs. His links will be in the show notes, as well as his new company. Take a look to see what they're doing over there. One last thing, just an ask from my standpoint. If you would, look me up on the interwebs, on the Instagram, on the Twitter, all those things, as well as like and share and leave a review of this podcast. Really means a lot to me. I'm enjoying the feedback that I'm getting, and it's all helpful, and I'm hoping this is delivering a product that you guys are enjoying. So, once again, just remember, growth happens between dawn and dusk.